Welcome back. Mark Small, Paul Ogden with Civil Discourse Now. Our guest is Sean Shepard. Our last segment we're going to discuss in abbreviated fashion, the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is, and correct me if I'm wrong, when the country was founded, Alexander Hamilton got George Washington and the Congress to create a national bank. It was only chartered for 20 years. At the end of that 20 years, Madison couldn't get it rechartered, and so it went out of existence. Then the second national bank came into existence in 1816. It only had a 20-year charter, and Andrew Jackson was vehemently against national banks. There was then no national bank as such, and in the early 20th century, there were 3 bank panics in a relatively short period of time, like 12 or 14 years. And several leaders wanted to have a national bank and came up with the idea of the Federal Reserve. Does that sound accurate?
It sounds reasonably accurate. In a nutshell. The Federal Reserve, as we know it today, is basically it's a private entity. It's what I would always call a quasi-governmental agency, but it's really privately owned by the member banks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking about our government, the Congress, having taken the responsibility for our money from the Treasury and basically handing it off to this private monopoly entity.
Okay, when you say responsibility, you mean power?
Sure.
Okay, so we have a private entity that has power over all of our money.
Yes.
And that entity it's never been audited. Is that correct?
Never been fully audited, no.
Well, and there's a statute that I understand provides that there are only limited audits that can be conducted on the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, and actually Congressman Ron Paul from Texas, who's now running for president, this has been an issue with him for his entire political career. Because one of his big hot buttons, which puts him a little different than a lot of the other candidates, is monetary policy and economics. And he tried very hard, and as we were discussing, I think, before we started filming, he had 300 and some people who had ponied up and said, I will co-sponsor a full audit of the Federal Reserve. And by the time they got it through, and all the Federal Reserve's lobbyists and all the special interest folks and all the people who were concerned got involved, they watered it down so much that you're still not going to get it.
Do you know who the Federal Reserve's chief lobbyist is right now? The same woman who was the chief lobbyist for Enron. And nobody real and I'm sorry.
And nobody questions this.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's the Fed. Well, they've got to do this. We have to do this, and that's absurd.
The Federal Reserve has control over the monetary policy as opposed to President and Congress handling the fiscal policy. What does that mean, monetary policy?
Well, the Federal Reserve, first off, the Federal Reserve is an entity that is given the power to basically provide a monopoly control of the money supply to us. So let's say we don't like what they're doing with how fast they're printing money, maybe, because it's devaluing what we've already got in our pockets, right? That creates inflation. You print more money that beyond the growth in the economy, it creates inflation. Inflation is an artificial creation by government at the macro level. So let's say you don't like what they're doing because the value of the money they make is going down too much. And you don't have another option. You don't have anywhere else you can go. I mean, people are going to put their money into gold, and there's a reason why gold's gone from $700 an ounce to $1,600, $1,700, $1,800 an ounce in the last few years. It's because that is a safe store of value while the governments around the world are destroying their currencies, because all of the governments now have some form of central bank fiat money system.
And the cash that you have in your wallet right now, those are Federal Reserve notes. Mm-hmm. Those are issued by the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve consists of a 7-member board of directors that are nominated by the President and confirmed by Congress.
I don't know if the entire board is. I know the chairman.
Okay. And there are 2 vacancies right now, and I didn't check about why they're vacant.
I saw that as well.
My guess would be that has something to do with Republicans blocking the president's appointments.
I think we're being considered, aren't we, Mark?
I'm being considered for a job far more important than that,
That's true.
so we won't get into that. I don't want to.
Jinx it.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx it at all. It's been 103 years since. Anyways,
So if the Federal Reserve prints more money, then we could have more inflation.
Right. And you will have that.
in 1979, Jimmy Carter persuaded the Fed to cut back the supply of money. Is that correct? And that essentially created a recession.
I don't know the specifics of everything that was going on in the 70s during Carter's administration. I'm old enough to remember the gas lines, and that we did have a really sour economy. One way to look at this is the government wants the inflation. Because all of this $14 trillion debt that we have, that's just the current debt, they can't do that without a Federal Reserve. Because they wouldn't have any other place to go get the money. So the Federal Reserve gets on their computer, and they type some numbers in, they hit return, and boom, they've created another trillion or $2 trillion or $500 billion. But the other side of this is that the government wants the inflation, because that's how they buy down the value of that debt over time. They can go out and they can spend $1 trillion, and they know, yeah, they're going to pay back $1 trillion, but by the time they pay that back, it's going to be with $100 billion worth of money, if they ever even bother to pay it back. They just erode it away over time. The real gotcha, and this is something I've thought about the last few years, is that inflation causes asset prices to go up. So let's say you're invested in the stock market, and you buy a stock 10 years ago for $5, and it goes up to $10, and you sell it off, and you got your profit in that. How much of that increase was just inflation created by the Federal Reserve System that now you have to pay capital gains taxes on? You're paying taxes on them printing money because it shows up as income.
I thought we didn't have capital gains anymore.
No, I think it's over 20% more than that.
Yeah.
Well, those
You
bastards.
personally just don't have any capital gains.
I thought that was why we had George W. Bush in office. I thought he was supposed to make those things go away.
I think that was estate taxes.
What is, first of all, aren't you taking a contrary position to what libertarians normally take? Normally, they want to get government out of the business. Here we have privatization of the handling of our money supply.
Well, and I think this is something you and I will agree on, is that privatization is a great idea when it's done in a competitive way. When you hand over a government-sponsored monopoly to one entity and call that privatization, it's really not. That's really corporatism. If you were to go out there and say, well, we're going to outsource this, and we're going to have 3 different competitors, and the one's the most efficient, it's done at the right price, handles things the best,
But there's
from the top. That's different.
There are certain things, though, that can't be privatized, but that you wouldn't privatize. And one of those is, for example, the issuance of money by a government. I mean, that's something that you really have to hold in-house, but my understanding of the Federal Reserve is they handle the issuance of the government's money.
They do. And there really are no checks and balances on that. Here's one of the biggest issues with something like the Federal Reserve, and this is an important one, is that in a true free market economy, you really would have choices over what money you used. Now, just like Visa, MasterCard, Discover, checks, I mean, we have different forms of money that we use, and the marketplace decides what's accepted and what's not, right? I mean, there's a reason you don't use Old Mo's branded credit card. Well, because you can't take it anymore and use it. They want a Visa, Discover, MasterCard because it's reputable and proven. That same thing happens, and that would happen in any kind of free market system. But when you have the Federal Reserve, which not only is printing and issuing our money, but they also control interest rates. Okay? So you have this group of 7 guys, and they sit around, 7 people, and they try to guess what is the right interest rate. What are we going to do? Oh no, the economy is starting to turn south. We need to juice it a little bit, so let's cut interest rates. And that's done for political reasons. Because, if the economy goes bad, your congressman can't get reelected, your president can't get reelected because somehow it's all their fault. Usually it is. And so they pump the economy back up. But what the economy is trying to do is send signals, because you have natural peaks and troughs in the business cycle. This happens. People build up, and there's an excess of capacity, and you have to slow down, let that capacity get absorbed, and then there's time to build up again. And what sends the signaling to the marketplace are interest rates. When there's a lot of money to lend and there's not a lot of takers, interest rates, theoretically, should be very low because the banks want to lend the money. If there's not very much money, it's a limited supply to lend out for capital projects, and a lot of people want it, interest rates would be very high because they can charge a premium for that money.
Yes.
So it creates this natural channel for what happens though is when the economy's doing well, and then it starts going that down slope, the Federal Reserve jumps in and says, oh, wow, we can't have this problem, well, let's juice it up, and they build it up, and they build it up. Well, you can only go against nature so long, and eventually those bubbles pop. We saw the stock market bubble in the 90s, up through 2001, and we saw all of that enthusiasm in the economy fizzle out of the stock market and into the real estate bubble. And then we saw, and the government pumped up the housing market, and then you see the real estate market collapse.
And the Federal Reserve's role in the real estate market collapse was?
Basically artificially low interest rates.
Which is the case now. Now the rates are as low as they've been for a while.
Yeah, and then they're out of weapons. The economy's still sour. And that's largely because we didn't liquidate toxic assets. We tried to cover them up and bail people out. We didn't let these.
Which is
I thought it was because we were in 2 wars at the same time as we were lowering taxes. I guess.
Well, that's probably a bad idea too. Lowering taxes is always a good idea. Wars are usually the worst use of money.
What's the option?
Well, constitutionally, you would return control of the supply to the Treasury.
Okay.
And we'd have a national bank like Alexander Hamilton.
As I recall, one of the national banks was held to be unconstitutional. I could be wrong about that.
No, there was an argument that it was unconstitutional.
It was never decided.
I don't believe it was decided.
Well, constitutionally, the Congress is granted the power to form money.
Yeah, but that hasn't...
Through the Treasury.
It's different than a constitutional argument about the national bank. We're at that portion of the show where you can do a 30-second rant on whatever you want. Sean, you're a guest. You go. Whatever it is you want to talk about, anything at all.
What's really got me this week is the Occupy Wall Street, the Occupy movement that's out there. Because you look at these pictures of these people, and they're railing against corporations. And granted, you mentioned Enron earlier. There have been some bad corporations out there. Usually, and Enron, a lot of people know this, was trying to get their special favors out of the government for all this green energy and exchanges and things. But you got these guys on Wall Street, and they're railing against these corporations. And they're sitting there with their iPads and their cell phones and their ball caps and their $200 sneakers. I mean, all these things provided to them, made available in the marketplace by corporations. And if you ask them, I'm not sure they really know what they're upset about. And I just wonder if some of that energy maybe needs to be directed back towards government messing things up, not just corporations. And certainly, the marriage of the two is never good.
Actually, there's a statement that they issued as to why it is they want to occupy Wall Street. One of the things that's beautiful in the way our system works here in the United States, the information doesn't get out there. If you'll read, you can check online, and a lot of these people are college students. They're upset because they're going to be in debt and they're not going to have jobs. It's a very well articulated reason that they're doing. That's my response to your rant. Watch Keith Ogden. That's the deal.
I don't know if I can make it through Keith Ogden.
And I guess I get the last word here. Recently, yesterday on my blog, Ogden on Politics, I publicized the fact that the City County Council President entered into a $225,000 contract with a political supporter to do redistricting in 2011 during a lame duck session of the Indianapolis City County Council. The law does not even allow that to happen. I am tired of these Republicans saying they're for the taxpayer, misappropriating taxpayer money. That was done in this case, and it's been done in other cases.
That's it. That's today. Civil Discourse now. Sean, thanks for coming on. We enjoyed having you as a guest.
Thank you.
Watch us next week. We're going to be talking about local politics. I'm Mark Small. That's Paul Ogden. Take care.